We are looking at chapter 5 today. This is going to be fitness assessments, where we kind of go over a lot of our general fitness assessment information, just like we've talked about in past classes. Robert, this is all new for you. But like for the most part, we've kind of covered a lot of this. You're not going to get all of the assessment information. This is going to correspond with chapter 5 of your weight loss manual. Like the PDF that I sent you guys, but it's going to correspond with chapter 6 of your regular NASM. And none of this info is going to contradict. However, some of the info from chapter 6, which is what you need to pass like your full test, is left out of this PowerPoint because it's like a Davies test, for instance. That's a performance assessment that measures upper body agility. You wouldn't want to do that with like an obese client for a multitude of reasons. Number one, it's really hard on the joint. Number two, psychologically, it might not be able to be completed. And then number three, it actually can like close off breathing due to like body composition and stuff. So we're going to skip some of the assessments. You're going to see the ones that are important for weight loss clientele. Where really our big goal is just to create a good calorie burn, right? Diving right in here, when we're actually doing my learning objectives, that was my resolution was to stop skipping these slides. After completing this section, we'll be able to understand like the key subjective and objective information regarding fitness assessments. So we'll understand like the differences between those two, how to confidently communicate about these fitness assessments, and then most importantly, use those findings to develop an individualized program, primarily for the goal of weight loss, right? We do fitness assessments literally for everything, you know? Assessments are such a key part of like what it is to be a personal trainer. But the ones that we're looking at, particularly in this lesson, are related to like weight loss goals. So we're not necessarily looking at performance ones. We're not necessarily looking at corrective exercise ones. We're just looking at things that'll help us write a program that will burn the most calories, right? So assessments, super useful at gaining insight into a person's past and present medical and physical history, right? So I always like to break down, you guys have heard me say this tens of thousands of times, but I always like to break down like the role of a personal trainer in 3 steps, right? And really the role of like anybody who's like in the service industry of any type, right? If you're a mechanic, if you're a doctor, you're a dentist, you're a trainer, you're a physical therapist, whatever, a repairman, like any of that, like you're going to go through these basic 3 steps. And step 1 is going to identify like a problem, right? You're going to identify like a need of your client. Step 2, you're going to solve that problem, meaning that you're going to develop a solution. And number 3, you're going to implement that solution. So you're going to do it, right? That's the 3 steps to being a trainer. We assess our clients to identify any issues that they might have. We write a program to address those issues, and then we take them to the gym and do it, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3. So we are primarily talking about step 1 today, where we are looking at like how to identify any issues that our client has, right? Whether that is posture related, and that's telling us about like somebody's aches and pains, or if it's cardiorespiratory related, which tells us a little bit about like why our client hates cardio so much, and just like struggles with it. That's not me being biased. Not everybody likes cardio, and it's usually because they haven't developed their cardiovascular system. You hate it, you don't do it, you get the results of you're not good at it, and then you hate it, and it's a loop. No judgments. I hate, there's certain things I hate when it comes to exercise too, and I'm not great at them. Mostly like spinal extension exercises. So like assessments can tell us that, right? They're really great for helping us gain insight. And that gives us gives us the data necessarily to know how to design an appropriate program, right? Anybody can find a good program on the internet. If you were to just like get on Google and just be like 3-day per week weightlifting program, you'd probably find a pretty good one, and it'd probably be pretty darn effective. I have nothing against cookie cutter programs in the short term, but just because I don't think they are necessarily bad, definitely doesn't mean I think they're good. And I think like the reason people are hiring trainers is because they want the best, right? And a program that's going to be the best is a program that's customized to you, right? Like me, I have a somewhat rare postural problem that like I was just talking about. I'm not so great at spinal extension. I teach a lot. I've taught a lot of group exercise over the years, and I've developed pretty darn good spinal flexion by teaching people how to do crunches. And so I just haven't spent enough time like doing the opposite in my own training. Spent a lot of time working on the six pack, not enough time developing my low back. So sometimes what will happen is due to like some weakness in my erector spinae muscles compared to my abdominal muscles, I'll get like a rounding sensation. Now, most people tend to sit all day. Like a lot of people have desk jobs, and so they end up like tightening up their hip flexors. So they have the opposite problem. They end up like over strengthening those low back muscles, and they end up with like a low back tilting, right? They have this like kind of exaggerated arch, whereas I tend to like tuck my butt underneath, right? Both are bad, right? Like we want to have a neutral spine in either scenario. But if you were to give me like a hip flexor stretch, that's not going to be super customized. I've got pretty mobile hip flexors. I don't really have a problem with either of my hip flexor muscles. But if you were to give me like a hamstring stretch, that's something that I struggle with based on my posture. So this is where we start to customize our problems, right? Does your client have elevated shoulders? Do they have knees that cave in? Do they have feet that turn out? Do they have low back grounding? Do they have low back arching? Do they lean excessively forward when they squat? What is it? What type of movement patterns does your client have? Or like, you know, is your client really good at long distance cardio, but then they struggle with higher intensities? You know, what do we need to know? What do we need to know about your client in order to write like an effective program? And so this is really what we're talking about with fitness assessments, right? We want to understand a little bit about their medical history. So we are going to do like a survey about medical history and past medical conditions, right? And we use that because we know we can start to, we know certain things that help us make certain assumptions, right? Like we know, and you'll hear this in other classes, and a lot of you have heard this before, we know that like a sprained ankle often leads to gluteal weakness on the same side leg. Because what ends up happening is, you know, you're walking around like this, where you're just not performing hip extension with that leg anymore. You're kind of putting all your weight into your other leg, and so then your glute on that same side leg gets weak. So if you get a client who says, yeah, I have a history of ankle sprains, I consistently sprain my right ankle, that tells us two things. We might have like a little bit of gluteal weakness on that side, and we have to just understand that, like, okay, why are you spraining your ankle so much? So now we're going to look at some of their other postural distortions, and we're going to look to see if maybe their knees cave in, or, you know, and chances are they have like really bad feet flattening. That's very commonly associated with ankle sprains. So current and past physical activity and dietary habits. If we have a client who is obese, we want to understand a little bit about like how often they've been active in the past and like what their diet was like. So that's going to be a big part of it. Physiologic assessments that are going to tell us a little bit about like what their heart rate is, and knowing what their heart rate is great because that gives us a target that we can aim for outside of that norm. You know, if your heart rate's resting around 75 beats per minute, that's not a bad resting heart rate, but it's certainly not a great one either. Like if you're a male, that's relatively high, just slightly outside of normal ranges. And so with an elevated resting heart rate like that, I know that your heart is not very efficient. It has to pump more in order to do the same amount of work that a heart that can get it done in less beats can, right? So now I'm going to write a program that addresses that and hopefully strengthens your heart. And then general likes and dislikes, you know, like just gathering a little bit of subjective information about your client will kind of paint in and fill in the gaps and tell you a little about like what their favorite types of exercises are. So first thing when we're gathering fitness assessments, we are always going to start with our subjective information. So subjective information is general information about a client that cannot be measured. Your client's your contact information, your client's goals, emergency contact, things like that. Those are all subjective, right? Now, a lot of times, like sometimes people make this mistake of being like, so subjective is like less important than objective, because like if I can't measure it, how do I know when I'm improving it, right? Like we do not want very subjective SMART goals, but we do want subjective information because, we as people live a very subjective life, right? Not everything we do every day can be measured. And so we do want to get this information in because it's a great way for us to kind of fill in and understand our clients' like lifestyle and how they maybe came up with the habits that they have. Two of the most important pieces of subjective information that you're going to gather are going to be the PAR-Q, which is the Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire. What that is it's a survey directed towards detecting any possible cardiorespiratory dysfunction. So if we look at a NASM PAR-Q, which we can see right here, all of these questions are going to be yes or no questions that are related to cardiorespiratory dysfunction. Like, has your doctor ever said that you have a heart condition and you should only perform physical activity as recommended by your doctor? You want to ask this question. This is incredible. Like every first time session you ever have with somebody, before you even put them through a fitness assessment, you should always start with your PAR-Q, because you don't want to be in the middle of your first session with somebody and be like, oh yeah, well I did have a heart attack yesterday. And then be like, really? Well, that would have been handy information to have. All right, no more burpees, oh, you're passed out. Great. So that's definitely not a scenario we want to find ourselves in. Do you feel pain in your chest? So when you're looking at questions like this, the big thing to remember, if your client answers yes to any of these questions, make sure they get a written permission from their doctor before they begin in any program, right? Any program that involves any type of exercise. This is just the best way to keep yourself safe. Now let's just look at the very rare circumstance where maybe somebody does have a heart attack. They did their PAR-Q, you did the PAR-Q with them, they still had a freaking heart attack, and they passed out on the gym floor, and then they're like, well, you put me through a routine that was too hard, right? And it's like, did I? Because I have this right here that says you have written permission from your doctor. Like, let him break any rules, So this is a very, very big, important thing, not only to keep your client safe, but also to keep you safe legally. Now, another subjective piece of information is going to be your general and medical history questionnaire. I think they do this weird thing in this where they call it the health history questionnaire. It's going to be referred to as a general and medical history questionnaire. But this allows us to identify more specific medical contraindications to exercise, risk factors, and any lifestyle behaviors. So some of this information that is related to weight loss that we don't see in the normal book is talking about things like a 24-hour dietary recall or a food frequency questionnaire or a food journal, right? All those are general pieces of information. Now, in the normal book that you're going to see, in your regular old textbook, you're going to see a continuation of the PAR-Q sheet here, which is just going to be the general medical question, like, what's your occupation? Does your occupation require extended periods of sitting? Does your occupation require repetitive movements? If that's true, then what are they, right? And this piece of information is really, really helpful. If your client sits all day, we know two things, right? We know that number one, they're not burning very many calories, right? They have a very, very low energy expenditure. And number two, they're tightening up their hip flexors all day. So I'm going to make sure that I pay close attention to their low back and see if they have that excessive low back arch, right? Do they look like they have like ballerina back, Because if that's the case, they've got super tight hip flexors, weakened gluteal muscles, weakened core muscles, and super tight low back muscles. For those of you who've been through our other classes, that's that lower cross syndrome, right? Tight from high to low, weak from high to low on the opposite side. Don't worry about it, Robert. It's coming up later. So does it require repetitive movements? That's another general good question to ask, right? If your client is consistently making motions like this, where maybe they're like a painter, right? That's going to tighten up the muscles on the rotator cuff. Does it require you to wear like an elevated or like a shoe with a heel? Like, do you have to wear dress shoes every day? Because then you're in plantar flexion. You're basically standing like this all day. Like, I'm exaggerating by coming up really, really high, but even a little bit of elevation means that my ankle is, bent forward slightly all day. And so the muscles that point my toes are going to get tight, and the muscles that pull my toes back are going to get weak. Does your job cause you mental stress? Again, that can explain a client's obesity, but it can also explain like if they have super overactive like upper respiratory muscles, right? Because we tend to take really shallow breathing patterns whenever we get stressed out. So all these are really important. And then as well, you're going to get information about any recreation. Like, what do you like to do? Like, what do you have any hobbies? What's your favorite physical activities? These are really great ways that help you design a program that's related and be like, you know what? First session, you told me you liked golf. Well, check this out. We're going to be working on your obliques a little bit, which is a really great thing that's going to help your golf swing, right? And then even in medical history, right? Do you have any chronic pain? Or have you ever had any surgeries? Are you taking any medications? And medications can be a really important one to know. And supplements as well, because they do have like specific effects on the body. You know, for instance, one of the most common ones that people will take, and they always leave it off the medications thing, they'll be taking things like hydroxycut. They'll take like a fat burner. And like those things are packed full of caffeine because the way they work, I mean, they can't magically burn fat off of your body, but what they can do is they can make you super bouncy. And like when you're doing this all day, you're just burning a lot of extra passive calories. And so like your clients will be taking that. And so you got to be aware of that because it can cause changes in blood pressure levels. And so if you got a client who's doing burpees, they're like 1, 2, and then they pass out, you know, because their blood is just not moving the way it should be. Or even crunches, actually, and too much motion of the head. It causes high blood pressure. Those are all like the general, these two are the ones you're going to see in the normal book. But speaking of like eating habits, this is obviously a very important part of you know, understanding a weight loss programming template. You know, we need to understand a little bit about our client's diet. So we might ask questions and do like, all right, well, let's walk back for the last 24 hours. You tell me what you consumed, or, you know, we'll do a food frequency questionnaire. How often do you have, you know, this type of food in your diet? Or maybe just like, all right, so now for the next week, you know, as we ramp up, right now, I just want you to focus on exercise, but over the next week, I want you to start journaling your food. And that way, like in the next 2 weeks, we're going to start working on your diet. But I want to gather adequate information first, you know? This doesn't always have to happen like on a first session. So those are all your subjective information pieces. Do you guys have any questions about any of that?
No.
Oh, all right. So now let's talk into the objective. The objective part is much, much longer because there's a lot of different pieces. Now the objective stuff is great because this is the number-based stuff. And you know me, I tend to be a pretty like number-based person. I kind of like having like the hard data. But like, again, like I want to make it very clear, that doesn't mean it's necessarily more important than the subjective stuff. But your objective information is going to be measurable information. This is typically number-based information. Although when you look at like, does your client's like shoulders elevate, right? That's, you know, we're not measuring how many inches they elevate, but it's still considered objective information. Because if you did want to use like an actual goniometer and look at the angle, then, you know, it could be objective. We base like things like knees caving in. A lot of times we just eyeball that, but in really advanced scenarios, you can actually like measure the degrees. And that's great if you want to do that. It tends to be very time consuming, but what's cool is like, you know, after a couple of weeks of training your client, you can start to show them like, hey, check it out. Like we're seeing, you know, less inward movement, but generally we tend to just eyeball it. So objective information is great because it can be used to compare your beginning numbers to numbers measured later as like a form of comparison. And so these can be things like physiologic assessments, like your resting heart rate, blood pressure, body composition assessments, like your weight, BMI, body fat percentage, cardiorespiratory assessments, like how well does your body perform under a very specific amount of stress, such as walking 1 mile. Posture and movement assessments, how does your body respond when you are putting a specific amount of stress on it, like squatting, for instance, or doing a pushing or pulling movement, and performance assessments. which are usually just you versus future you, right? Like in all these versions, we're kind of looking for some norms and hoping that our client will fall between those norms. An average BMI range, a healthy body fat percentage, a cardiorespiratory score that's in the good range, posture that's neutral. But performance assessments are great because those are just you versus future you. How much can you bench? That question really doesn't matter much, but it's kind of cool when you see it improve. So performance assessments like max strength assessments or speed and agility assessments, all those kind of things are really fun. However, they're definitely not going to be focused in this lesson, just because a lot of times the most important thing for a weight loss client is the weight loss. So, all right. And those are in there. I should have switched the slides, but I didn't. All right. One of the most important ones, sort of, is going to be the body mass index assessment. So BMI is going to assess your client's height to weight ratio. So that is going to be their weight in kilograms divided by their height in meters squared. So that's the formula right there that you always want to know. We do know that we see obesity-related problems when a person's BMI is greater than 25. You guys know that, so we're going to go ahead and push past that one. Now, some of our physiologic assessments that we have. This is providing really great information about, things that are sort of the most important parts of our health, right? How well your heart is working and how well your blood vessels are working, right? Your cardiorespiratory system is really what we're measuring here. Now, we can't necessarily, it's not very practical for us to do, an assessment of everything related. I'm not going to pull your blood out of your body and measure how much iron it has in it, which is definitely part of how your cardiovascular system functions. But I am going to measure things like your heart rate, because I do know that your heart rate is directly related to how well your entire cardiovascular system is performing. If it's pumping really fast, I know that it is struggling to keep up. If it's pumping really slow, I know that it's keeping up under stress just fine. So physiologic assessments are things like heart rate. Now, there's two places you can get your heart rate. There is your radial pulse, which is the one that NASM is going to recommend. But this is going to be the number of beats in 60 seconds, and you're going to measure it by lightly placing two fingers along the arm in line with and just above the thumb. So basically, you want to do this on their left hand. Make sure that they don't have like a watch or anything like that on. And then you're going to take two fingers and you're going to go just where like the thumb and the index finger meet and go a couple inches above that. And that's where you're going to find your pulse. Now, that's really, really great. You can do this in any way that you want to do it. You can do it for a full 60 seconds, which will give you, you can just count the number of beats. 1, 2, 3, all up for a full 60 seconds. You can do it for 30 seconds and multiply it by 2. That'll give you the number of beats in 60 seconds. You can do it for 6 seconds and multiply it by 10. Now, if your client is resting and you're just gathering it in general in the beginning, I think the 60-second method works just fine. You're not exercising. It's not inconvenient for you to do a full 60 seconds. NASM is going to recommend 30 seconds and multiply by 2 or 10 seconds and multiply by 6. It doesn't really matter how you do it, but honestly, you've got a full minute's time, so why not? Now, that being said, if you are measuring it like mid-exercise, which would not be, during a fitness assessment, let's say you're measuring it in the middle of like a workout and you're trying to keep them between a specific zone, that's where the 6 seconds multiplied by 10 method tends to work a little bit better. Or let's say you're doing fitness assessments like the Rockport Walk Test or the YMCA 3-minute step test, which are assessments we're going to look at in just a minute. Those have specific rules. The YMCA 3-minute step test, for instance, is designed for it to be a 60-second test after it's over, because you are measuring how their heart rate slows down, not what their heart rate is at the end of the test. But the Rockport Walk Test, which is the one we're going to prefer for obese clientele, is going to be just what their heart rate is at the end of the test. So that one, a 6-second method multiplied by 10 is going to be your best friend, because the longer you take that measurement, the more their heart rate comes down, and that starts to skew the results. So there are some rules, but they're related to whatever specific assessment you are looking at. In regards to just a normal heart rate assessment to get a resting heart rate, do a full 60 seconds, in my opinion. That's my favorite version. The other place you can get a heart rate is also on the side of the neck at the carotid pulse. So what you're going to do is you're just going to go 2 fingers just off to the side of the larynx here. So guys, it's pretty easy to spot your Adam's apple, and that kind of shows you what your larynx is, and you just kind of move right off to the side of it. Ladies, same concept. You're just going to look for the central tube there and just move right off to the side. This is great. I have nothing against the carotid pulse personally, but NASM doesn't typically recommend it because it's just uncomfortable to, you know, put your hands on somebody's neck. And number 2, like if they are exercising pretty intensely, if you push too hard, you do not want to like limit blood flow to the brain, and you also don't want to put pressure on the larynx where they're bringing in oxygen. But I don't think either of those things are really going to happen. I mean, if I'm being perfectly honest. But NASM's not going to recommend it, so that's the one you want to remember. NASM is going to recommend your radial pulse. Average resting heart rates are about 70 beats for most men, about 75 beats for most women. You'll see that pretty commonly. A lot of times you're going to hear the term between 70 and 80 beats per minute. That's typically how it's presented. Now, once you know what their resting heart rate is, right, what's really cool about this is now you can determine their target heart rate training zones. And this is like something that I did today, right? Like I've got my little heart rate monitor here, and I was doing some zone 2 cardio training today. So I want to be somewhere between 76 and 85% of my heart rate max, right? That's where I was hoping to be. And there was like, it only happened once, luckily. I was working as hard as I was supposed to, you know, for it to be the workout I wanted it to be. But there was one round where I was doing like an uphill sprint, and, you know, timer went off and I was done, and I stopped to turn around to like walk back and looked at my heart rate, and I was like, you know what? Didn't actually get high that time. I got to try to get to that next shrub. Got to make sure I run a little harder next time. You know, I got lazy on that lap. It's definitely something that happened afterwards, but like if you are there coaching your client, right? This is where it's like, oh, come on, Alyssa, hit that plus sign. I know you got more in you, right? And it's like, no, I feel crappy today. And it's like, nope, I can tell. I ran the numbers. Don't present it like that. You'd be the most annoying trainer in the world. But I do love doing that. Actually, I always tell this story, but I used to trick people into singing Eye of the Tiger. Me and this other trainer both did this. We used to trick people into singing Eye of the Tiger in the middle of a group exercise class. And so be like, come on, you guys, you all know the word of this. And it's the da-da-da of the tiger. And I'd be like, all right, all of you who had enough breath to do that, you're not working hard enough. Go faster. And it was like it was a trap. And like eventually, like, you know, we had repeat guests who like knew, and they'd be like, so like stopped working. But just a fun little cheesy thing to do. So that's what your target heart rate zones are, right? They're your training zones. Now, the old method for doing this, the simple method, is just figuring out what your heart rate max is. Now, your heart rate max is just simply 220 minus your age. This is always going to be your formula for heart rate max, okay? 220 minus your age. Does that sound super accurate?
No.
Definitely not, right? Because I definitely know some 32-year-olds, you know, not to toot my own horn, but like who are not in as good a cardio shape as I am. And at the same time, I'm sure there's, you know, you were to put me up against like an Olympic 32-year-old, and I'm gonna get my butt kicked. You know, but we have the same age, so like our heart rate training numbers are gonna be the same, right? All right, I want you to be at 145, right? 145 is going to feel very different for me than it's going to feel for this guy over here, and it's going to feel very different for that lady over there, right? Like that's not going to be very accurate. So we like this version. If this is all you have access to, go for it. But the way you're going to do this is you're simply going to go your heart rate max, and you are going to multiply it by either 0.65 or 0.75, and that's going to give you 65 to 75%, which is what we call zone 1. We're going to break this into 3 primary zones, right? Your zone 3 is primarily going to target your phosphagen system. Zone 2 is primarily going to target glycolysis. And zone 1 is primarily going to target your aerobic energy. So this is your long-term system. If you are a distance runner, this is your best friend. If you are a strength training athlete who is primarily focused on things like hypertrophy, this is very good. And if you are a power athlete, who is doing sprints, for athletics, this is your best friend, right? So these are short sprints, medium still sprints, and then long distance running. So when you're doing interval training, right? If you've ever done like Orange Theory, right? Orange Theory Fitness, which is great, by the way, I'm a big fan. They're going to break you into like your green zone, your yellow zone, your orange zone, and your red zone, I think. Don't quote me on that. It's like that's how I get sued. But like that's great. Like those are all really good ways. They're just calculating all your numbers, and then you're wearing a heart rate monitor, and it shows up on the TV, and that way they can come by and be like, "All right, come on, Robert. Like it looks like you're in the yellow zone. We're trying to be orange right now." And then they come over and they push that little plus sign, and you're like, "Oh, I hate you." And that's what's really great about it. That kind of takes the guesswork out. So that's a really decent version. But if you want to get really accurate heart rate training zones, you're going to use a different formula. And this is going to be what's referred to as the heart rate reserve method, or Karvonen formula. This is going to calculate your target heart rate using the difference between your max heart rate, which is still 220 minus your age, and your resting heart rate. So if you have a lower resting heart rate, less is going to come off of that heart rate max. So your training zones are going to be different. And that way, like, if I've got a resting heart rate of 61 beats per minute, and somebody over here has a resting heart rate of 72 beats per minute, and somebody over here has a resting heart rate of 55 beats per minute, but we're all the same age, in scenario 1, we all get the same workout. But in scenario 2, we get a workout that's customized to our resting heart rate. So like, if I were to do this for myself, right? And I was trying to be in zone 2 today, I would take my heart rate max, which is 220 minus 32, right? So that's a heart rate max of 188 beats per minute. And then I would minus my heart rate rest. So I would take 61 beats out of that, leaving me with 127. Then I would multiply that by the intensity that I desire, which is going to be a minimum of 76. So I'm going to go times 0.76, because that's 76%, right? I moved the decimal twice. And that's going to give me 96.5, but that's a very low heart rate. So what the heck? Well, at the end, I got to add my resting heart rate back on. So then I got to go plus 61. So my actual target heart rate today was a minimum of 157.5. Okay. And in my maximum resting heart rate, I do that whole formula again, but using 0.85. So 220 minus 32. Minus 61 times 0.85 plus 61, and a high of 168. And I already forgot the other number, but that's my range, right? By the way, if you want a really easy way to do this, Karvonen calculator. This website right here is the one I like to use, briancalkins.com. This has been up for like 10 years. And really, you're just going to go, I'm 32, resting heart rate 61, calculate. Boom. The old method, right? My old zones would have been 122 to 141. My news, that's not true. My old zones would have been 141 to 160. But now my new zones are 156 to 169. So that's going to give me a much more accurate method for calculating this. And so now I know what my, I should be recovering here to here, and I should be working from here to here. And that's another thing that I did today. Like, I know that like I was also tracking what my heart rate is at the end of my rest. And if at the end of that rest, if it dropped below 144, I was like, oh, too low, right? And so then I would like jog it a little bit to keep it slightly elevated in between rounds. Does that make sense, everybody?
I have a question.
Yeah.
How are you getting the client's resting heart rate? Are you having them take it for 2-3 days and then estimate it between those three? Like, how are you, like, resting heart rate varies all the time, between a couple, points. So it's like, how are you?
This is a tough question because like I'm talking about being specific here, and the world we live in is actually very unspecific. So this is a tough question. This is very similar in feeling, in my opinion, to how we say like the BMR is the accurately measured metabolism, but then we use math to catch it. So it's like that's not accurate. Like, math doesn't take into account my cellular metabolism. So here's what I've experienced in my career versus what is in your textbook. Your textbook is going to tell you just like you just said it. It's actually going to instruct you to tell your clients to measure their resting heart rate before they get out of bed in the morning 3 days in a row.
Oh,
Write all of the numbers down and bring it in. And then you're just going to average them out.
okay.
But I have never once been able to get anybody to do it. I have failed at that for 12 years. Because your client, like, it's going to be like, did you get your resting heart rate? Oh, I forgot. Okay, great. Did you get your resting heart rate? Oh, yeah, now I know. So typically, the way I like to do it, what actually has kind of worked for me, is keep your clients seated in a chair, make them fill out all their contact info, emergency stuff. Don't let them get up, and then like ask them their part Q, ask them their general medical history questionnaire. Before they get up out of that chair, walk over and measure their resting heart rate. They've been a lot of people resting heart rate. I mean, you go to the doctor's office, they get your resting heart rate. They make you sit for 1 minute, right?
Yeah, right. They do. So they can rest. You came in from the garage or whatever. They have you sit and rest. But so are we only taking the one, like after they did the PAR-Q and the questionnaire, you just measure the one resting heart rate, or are we doing it 3 days in a row?
Ooh, good question. I actually have never really
Like
bothered.
you do it the first time, you say, hey, come in 5 minutes early so I can get your resting heart rate, have them sit and do the resting heart rate for those 3 days. And then, you know what I mean? Like how I
actually really love that. I think that's great because there are things like, if they had a Red Bull, for instance.
Yeah, they're in a hurry. They were late. They were, there was a crash. There are all these things that could have happened before they come in. I mean,
I'll be honest, I haven't done that. I usually get it on their first session and then I use it for 4 weeks. And then when I do all their reassessments, I get it again. That's how I've typically done it. So okay. I usually find time for them to sit for about 5 minutes. And by the way, like where does the sitting come in the later assessments? Because like I already have their PAR-Q and general history questionnaire. That's where it comes like down to goal setting. So it's like I do like a review of like what we're looking for in today's assessment. Where I'm like, okay, so we're gonna do our first reassessment today. I'm gonna look at this, and this. Let's talk about like where we wanted to be today versus like where we might be. And then let's see like, what do you think we want to set up for the future? And so like during that like initial, and I usually try to wrap that up in like 5 minutes. Yeah, to be honest, it usually takes longer than that, but that's usually, I'm trying to like push tempo there because I want to get to the weights. And that's when I gather their heart rate again, because it will change, pretty rapidly actually, because cardio adjusts quick in the beginning.
Yeah.
You'll notice like it just in 4 weeks of like them doing their homework, it's like, it'll drop right down. And most of that is just because of like enzymes rather than actual like, and they get super excited about it. And I always have to explain to them, I'm like, that's great. Like it is an improvement. Make no mistake. Like I'm not trying to minimize your progress here. I do need you to be aware though that like it's not always going to drop like that. Like it's going to slow down quick. This first big drop was usually because like you're starting to produce like cardiovascular enzymes and like you hadn't had them before. So it's not that your heart's stronger, it's that your blood's better. Which sounds really weird, but that's honestly where we see our first big improvements early on. I even had that a little bit today. You know, I'm only in the second week of like doing a bunch of these like hill things. And I was like, man, this is way easier today. Just like, oh, I haven't done glycolytic training in a while. You know, I've just been doing like long distance jogs. So anyway,
Okay.
but that's how I do it. I like your method though, Maggie. But I will say, like in what tends to happen is you don't get your clients to like your clients like showing up 5 minutes early gets burned up by them doing the treadmill to increase their core temperature so that you don't have to do it. So I find that like once you get into like training, it's really hard to slow that roll to get a resting heart rate. But I will also say, on the flip side, one thing that I often do with my clients, I encourage, and you guys absolutely should do this, get a good heart rate monitor. These are fine. Like, I don't hate the Fitbit, and I totally use it when I want to be convenient. But if you can get a chest strap heart rate monitor that actually measures the electric signal your heart makes, that's super accurate. This is usually pretty accurate when it's at a low rate. Like right now, it says that I'm at like 79, which makes sense because like I'm standing up and I'm a little animated, right? If I were, in fact, just for the sake of it, we'll look at this in a few minutes. Let's transformer this down into sitting mode, and we'll look at what happens in just 1 minute's time. But I like these. They tend to be accurate when your heart rate's low. They tend to get less accurate when your heart rate is high, because this actually counts blood as it rushes by. It's basically measuring. It's almost like if you were to watch and count the number of cars going by outside your house. It's almost kind of like that. That's why it's a green light, actually. That's why they're all green light, because it's on the opposite color spectrum of like your red blood cells. So it can see through your skin and measure. But it's subject to, the color of your skin is going to affect how accurate it is, how fast your heart rate is going. Eventually, it all kind of looks like one big flow. That affects how accurate it is. So it tends to get less accurate as you go along. If you get super sweaty, that can cause it to like move to different parts of your arm, and so then that throws off its rhythm. So, I like these, but they're not perfect. The ones that are strapped to your chest, they're literally measuring, like, they're looking for electric impulses. So the second it gets there's a burst of electricity nearby, it knows that your heart made that, because it's only looking for a frequency at negative 70 millivolts, which is the frequency that your heart makes. Yep, down to 71. So drop by 8 beats just by sitting down. So not bad. I mean, by the way, it's not bad. Like, that's pretty accurate, right? Like, this wasn't very much time. It's just not perfect. And if you can get the ones that have GPS, oh, it's even better. And like your cadence, and they got waterproof ones. They're super cool. The one I like is just the Polar H7. That's the one that I use. It's the one that's hanging where normally a coat, hanging on a coat rack, where, because what am I going to need a coat in LA? My roommates all make fun of me because it's like sweatshirt, coat, hat, heart rate monitor, and they're like, that one's Brett's. So anyway, okay, my mouse does not like sitting mode. Okay, so let's look. That's the heart rate reserve method. Another physiologic assessment is blood pressure, and that's the amount of pressure like on your blood vessels walls, right? So like as you perform more work, your heart is going to pump a little bit harder. Yes, that's what I want, but that's too much. And so it is going to push on that. We want like that pressure to be around 120/80. That's normal blood pressure. If it gets somewhere as high as like 140/90, that is what we consider to be hypertension. So we're going to measure that in our clients because blood pressure is really important. We need to know what our client's blood pressure is. If they have elevated blood pressure, we don't want to do things like sit-ups, right? Because their head is going to be going up and down and up and down, and all of a sudden, like, They might move their head up here, but their blood still wants to be back there, and then all of a sudden they pass out, right? Or burpees, right? Things that change body position really rapidly, not recommended for clients who have hypertension. But we also know that like working an upper body exercise, then a lower body exercise, then an upper body exercise, then a lower body exercise, and going back and forth between that is really good for blood pressure. You know, you want to keep the body upright the whole time, but like, you know, you would do like a standing cable chest press followed by like walking lunges, followed by like maybe a seated pull down, followed by a step up to balance, right? I went legs, chest, legs, back, right? And that's a great way to go upper body, lower body, upper body, lower body. So definitely one of our physiologic assessments. Now, shifting gears a little bit, we've got our body composition assessments. These are going to be things like your weight, body fat percentage, things like that. So one of the most common ones is obviously we've got bioelectric impedance here, right? That's going to estimate your body fat percentage by measuring the speed at which an electric current runs through the body. So if it runs really quickly, we know that, we know that electricity runs through water really, really fast, right? And most of your tissues in your body have lots of water in it, but your fat tissue doesn't, right? Fat is mostly made up of oils. And so the higher body fat, the more impeded the flow will be. And so like if you tell the machine that you weigh 180 pounds and it travels really fast, it's gonna say, all right, you get a low body fat percentage. But if you tell it you weigh 180 pounds and it travels really slowly, it's gonna estimate your body fat percentage higher. It's not perfect, but it's actually, I mean, the tech on that has gotten way better over the years. So this is a pretty practical, very, very easy and pretty accurate method. Another really common one that is going to take up a lot of slides, by the way, is going to be your Skinfold measurements. And this is going to estimate your body fat percentage by basically measuring your skin fold girth, right? So you're going to pinch. We know that there is fat like held under the skin. And so like when we estimate body fat percentage using this, we can kind of, it's pretty accurate actually. So for the most part, you're going to do an indirect measure of like skin fold thickness. You do, when you're doing this, guys, want to make sure you take two measurements, kind of like what you're talking about, Maggie, like try to be as accurate as possible. You're going to want to do a minimum of about 2 measurements at each of the sites and then just average the 2 together. Unless you get like a major outlier, and then in which case I would say like do 3 and eliminate 1 that's like way, way off. And that'll happen sometimes, like especially with the cheaper ones. Like I shouldn't say this, but I know we give you guys body fat testers like in your bags and stuff. They're fine. That's the one that a lot of people use, but it's based on like how, like when the little ball, it's like the way it works is there's like a little plastic cutout, and then like you're pushing on it and you're pushing on, and eventually it just kind of goes and like locks in. And the second it locks in, that's where you're supposed to stop pinching. But that's not perfect by any means. So, oh, did I miss somebody? So it's not exactly perfect. Hold on a second. Irene, I don't know why. Hold on one second. Irene's got her first, she's her first disconnect. She doesn't know how to get back in. You gotta punch the code back in and it will prompt me to let you enter the room. So anyway, I like those body fat testers. They're a great place to start, but I recommend purchasing like a better one if you're going to continue doing that method. But then again, honestly, guys, the bioelectric stuff is so good nowadays. I think that this method is kind of going out of style. But it is still accurate. Like, I mean, they're not bad. So the 4 sites that you're going to do it are going to be, and NASM is going to use the 4-site method. There are 7-site methods. There's other methods out there, but the one that NASM is going to recommend is what's called the Dernan-Wamersley formula, which is the greatest name of all time. And it's a 4-site method. Biceps, biceps, triceps, Subscapular, which is just what you're going to do is you're going to go 1 to 2 centimeters below the little pointy part of the scapula, the inferior angle, and then 1 to 2 centimeters above the iliac spine. Both of those last two are at a 45-degree angle. So I'll pull up a picture here. Subscapular Dernan. That. Yeah, so you're gonna do it. Oh, come on, I gotta have a better picture than that. There we go, that'll work. So there's the, well, yeah, this is totally vertical. You would do a 45-degree angle. Oh, this is actually not the right one. That's the quadriceps. Yeah, wrong method, sorry. Dernan formula, come on, hook me up. Yeah, that'll work. So here, and here. It's a weird picture. Irene's not coming back in. Just having technical difficulties. All right. So those are two of the most common, right? Oh, there's photos. So there's the there's the bicep. By the way, these are great. These are like $100, but they're really, these tend to be really accurate. Tricep, subscapular, right? There's the inferior angle there. Oh, I don't know. And iliac spine. Sorry, let me just text her separately. What? Try closing the hole. That doesn't make any sense. Wait, does that mean Nancy? Does that mean you're not here either? What? What is going on tonight? We're losing troops. Lost Armin too. I think I lost 3 people so far. Sorry guys for the delay. That's so weird. Okay. Keep soldiering on. So what you're going to do to calculate all that is basically add all 4 of those sides together, and then you're going to look on a chart, and it's going to tell you their body fat mass, right? What's up, Nancy? Welcome back. I don't know what's going on. All right, so now when you are calculating body composition, we talked about this in I think our nutrition class, or maybe it was in physiology. But when you are calculating the pounds of fat mass, right? You're going to do this by looking at overall body composition. So you've got your body mass, which is your weight, right? That is made up of your fat mass and your fat-free mass. So that's your lean body mass plus the pounds of fat that you have on your body. So in order to figure out what your fat mass is, you're going to take your poundage and multiply it by your body fat percentage. So if somebody weighs 200 pounds and they have a 30% body fat percentage, we know that their fat mass is going to be 60 pounds, because 200 multiplied by 30 is 60 pounds. Now, in order to figure out your fat-free mass, all you need to do is subtract your body mass from your fat mass from your body mass, right? And so you go body mass minus fat mass. They have a lean body mass of 140. And this is really great, because let's say this client here is on like a weight loss program, right? Let's say we put this person on a reduced calorie diet and they drop 10 pounds, right? So they come down to 190 pounds, but we find that their body fat percentage has also dropped pretty drastically. Let's say it's dropped all the way down to 26%. So now we're going to multiply that by 0.26, which means now they have a fat mass of 49.4 pounds, which means they lost 10 pounds of weight, but they lost 10.6 pounds of fat, which means that they gained 0.4 pounds, woo boy, of muscle, right? Does that make sense, guys? Or maybe, you know, they happen to be carrying around a little bit of water weight or something. But, you know, that's a really great way for us to kind of be able to measure and show our clients like, hey, you're not just losing weight, you're losing fat, right? So this is most of the time, like if you have a machine, if you are doing bioelectric impedance, it's going to do all this math for you. But if you are doing the Skinfold measurements and you're using an old school scale, this is how you can figure out those numbers. Because we don't want to lose just weight, right? We want to lose fat. Or we don't just want to gain weight, we want to gain muscle, which is actually this is what much more applicable towards, by the way, because it's always people are much more worried about, like, you know, on a calorie surplus, just gaining body fat, right? We want to gain muscle, not fat mass. Okay, so other body composition assessments that we've got are also going to be your circumference measurements, right? We talked about this a little bit in our nutrition class. We were looking at what normal circumference measurements are. And so whenever you're doing these measurements, and this is true of all assessments, you just want to try to be as consistent as possible. Consistency is your best friend. So we use specific landmarks to be able to measure these things. If you are measuring the neck, we are going to do it across the Adam's apple. If you are measuring the chest, for most men, you're going to go just straight across the nipple line. For most women, you're probably going to go against the first apparent flattening of the chest. So you're going to look to see like where everything kind of starts flattening out on the breastbone rather than on the breasts themselves. Quick pro tip, by the way, for anybody training female clients, which is going to be everybody. Why is that? Make sure your clients wear the same clothing every single time, especially your female clients. Same sports bra. That stuff will shake someone's confidence like that when you're like, wow, you gained 3.5 inches in 4 weeks. What happened there, right? It's like, oh, the program's not working, right? It is a confidence shatterer. So always, my recommendation, this is actually the only reason I use before and after photos, because I'm not a big I'm not a big before and after photo person, but I will often take before photos and send them to my client as a sneaky way of being like, this is what you wore. Wear it again. Every single assessment. Gosh dang it. I don't know why I don't see you in the waiting room. I'm sorry, Nancy. I'm sorry, Irene. I don't see you. I don't get it. This is just a classic example of like a silly program. Yeah. Oh. Okay. So that is going to be your chest measurement. Waist measurement, it is always at the narrowest part of the waist. If there is no, like, you know, if it's kind of like this guy here where it's just like a straight line. If there is no narrowing, just go straight on the belly button. I personally like going on the belly button no matter what, if I am taking measurements just for the sake of, this is another like weird thing, like Maggie, this kind of goes in line with kind of what we were talking about earlier, like the real world versus what you're told in your books. They have different purposes. If I am just taking measurements only for the sake of showing my client when they've made progress, I actually like to go against the belly button every single time, because it's super fast and it's super consistent, and I don't have to worry about like my own perception of things. However, that's a very inaccurate way to measure the waist. Like the waist is a measurement of the narrowest part of the waist. So if I'm just trying to show you like, hey, we lost 1/2 inch, hey, we lost 1 inch, hey, we lost 3/4 of an inch, 1.5 inches, you know, like if I'm just trying to show you progress, I'll use body landmarks and just keep them the same every time. But if I'm trying to like do a waist to hip ratio, for instance, you got to do it accurately. You got to do it at the narrowest part of the waist. Same thing is true for hip measurements. Hip measurements should always be done at the widest part of the hips. My favorite method though is actually to use your thumb on the belly button and then go off to the side and do the longest finger. And that basically makes sure, yeah, basically you make a little box and you go like that, and then you do the longest finger. And what that does is it means that you are measuring the exact same spot every single time, as long as your client, you know, doesn't lose a finger in between seconds. So that's a definitely like a Brad method more so than it is like something you'll find in a book. But they have different purposes. Like never replace these types of measurements. These are physiologic as well as like, you know, circumference. Hips, widest part of the hips from the frontal view and with the feet together, okay? So widest portion here. Thigh, 10 inches above the patella. This is one that you'll often modify, by the way. 10 inches above the patella on a shorter client. Sometimes your client's patella is 10 inches long. So you're gonna get real personal. So instead, like you can modify it, you know, you're just gonna go like measure 6 inches. Just make sure you write it on the assessment sheet. You can do it wherever you wanna do it. That's actually something I do on the calf too. The calf should always be at the widest circumference of the calf, but again, I just don't have a lot of trust in myself to be the same every time. And so I like to use landmarks. So I like to do like 6 inches down the calf or 4 inches or whatever. And whenever I measure it, I write it down and say, you know, this is where I measured it. And that's how I keep consistent. But that's not the, you know, if we look at like a waist to hip ratio, right? If you were to do like my belly button method and my hip method, it's going to screw the ratio up because you're not measuring at the narrowest part and the widest part. You're just kind of measuring something else, you know? So if you're doing this, it's very important that you do widest and narrowest. So it's the ratio of the narrowest part of the hip and the widest, narrowest part of the waist and widest part of the hip. And then we are looking for a ratio of higher than 0.8 for females or higher than 0.95 for males. Both of those are considered putting you at higher risk for certain diseases. So ideally we want to be below 0.8 and we want to be below 0.95. I know I screwed that up last time when I put the freaking greater than less than symbols in the wrong order. Okay. Now we're getting into a little bit of like, you know, all of that is great because now we understand like our client's status. Now let's look at like what type of training we should give them. Should we give them a hard cardio routine, a gentle cardio routine? Let's find out. So we have our cardiorespiratory assessment. So this is going to provide us with valuable information regarding their cardiovascular efficiency, like if they have a really great cardiorespiratory system or not. So there's two common forms that you're going to see. You're going to see the YMCA 3-minute step test. Oh my God, it's not in the slides. You're going to see the YMCA 3-minute step test, which is, in my opinion, the easiest because it's only 3 minutes long. It's super practical and easy to set up, but it's not for everybody because it can be kind of high impact. And what it looks like is you use a 12-inch step and you instruct your client to climb onto that step, right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot, right? That's one step. So what I mean by that is like, they're gonna go, you know, they're gonna step up with the one leg and then they'll go to the other leg and then they're gonna step down. So it'll be up, up, down, down, left, right, up, up, down, down, right? That's how you're going to do that. And you're going to have them go at a very, very, very specific pace, which is why you actually need to use a metronome set to 96 beats per minute. So I'm going to play this for just a second because it'll drive everybody crazy. But you're just going to set a metronome with your client and you're going to go left, right, up, up, down, down. So because you're using a metronome, you know that every single client stepped at the same pace. You always use a 12-inch step, so every single client got the same height, right? And you always go for exactly 3 minutes, so every single client got the same length. So everybody got the same amount of stress. Now what we're going to measure, when the test is over, you're going to instruct your client to sit on the step. They're going to turn around and sit down and present their left arm as quickly as possible. And you are going to measure what their pulse is over a full minute's time. You want to measure it for a full 60 seconds. Now, the reason we don't want to do like the 6 seconds multiplied by 10 is because I'm not measuring what your pulse is at the end of the test. What I'm measuring is how quickly your heart rate drops in 60 seconds when I give it this much stress. It's always the same amount of stress for every single client, right? And I'm just measuring how well you recover. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to look on a chart. And this chart here, like if it was me, for instance, right, here's the men's side down here. I am between 26 and 35 years old. So at the end of 60 seconds, if my heart rate was 125, right, I'd be just between like the poor and very poor categories, right? Which would mean when you are writing a cardio program for me, I'm not ready for zone 3. You should not be taking me up to zone 3. You shouldn't even be taking me up to zone 2. So you're going to use zone 1 as the appropriate type of cardio to give your client. So that's somewhere between 65 and 75% of their max heart rate. Because we calculated those numbers earlier in our assessment, I'm not going to tell my client, Maggie, I want you between 65 and 75% of your max heart rate. And you're going to go, huh? I'm going to say, I want you between 114 and 125, right? That's accurate. And they can use the little things on the treadmill for all I care. You know, those things actually, they're not terrible. So that is how the 3-minute step test is going to work. So super similarly, but here's the thing. 12-inch step over and over and over and over and over again. This might be kind of high impact for an obese client, right? So if you've got a client who is relatively heavy, that impact over and over and over again could be a risk factor. So instead, we're going to use an assessment that I think is actually harder, but it's gentler like overall, called the Rockport Walk Test. And the Rockport Walk Test is a cardio assessment that is used to estimate your VO2 max based on a 1-mile walk performed as fast as possible. So you want to put your client typically on a track when you're doing this, although it can be done on treadmills. The problem with treadmills, though, is that they tend to like let your client relax, or they might push your client too hard, and so they go into this kind of like half jog thing. You really do want it to be a walk, but it is going to be like as fast a walk as possible. So it'll almost look like your client's like, I gotta go to the bathroom. They're just like, but it's a walk. If they get into a jog, it kills the test, right? And so they're going to walk that mile as fast as you can. Now, at the end of that test, you need to make sure that you record exactly how long it took them to do it, which is going to be used in a minute. And then you are also going to take their pulse at the end of the test. So this is where the 6 second multiplied by 10 method is what you're going to want to do. Because we don't want it to recover slowly. That's going to fudge the results, right? So here's the thing. This is kind of a rough formula, and it's listed in your textbook actually to see the formula. But what's cool about this is it doesn't just tell you like the target heart rate zone. It's actually used to kind of estimate what your client's VO2 max is, which is kind of nice actually. And so it actually gives you a pretty good estimation because it's taking into account their age, weight, I think height, gender, and it's using all of that information to calculate how much oxygen they're consuming. If we can consume more oxygen, we're in better shape, right? So the higher the VO2 max score, the more intense program you're going to get. So I'm going to pull up just really quickly VO2 max calculator, Rockport calculator. Here's this formula, by the way. Look at this crap. He said, look at this formula. Where is it? Actually, that's not it. So it is, and these numbers are stagnant, by the way. Like these are numbers you want to keep. 132.853 minus whatever 0.0769 times your weight in pounds is. And then you subtract another whatever 0.303 or 0.3877 times your age. So weight, age, gender, and then time it took you to do the test and what your heart rate is at the end. So let's say our client, right, 175. And the heart rate at the end of the test, we'll say was 120. No, we'll say 29. And it took 13 minutes and 14 seconds. So here is our VO2 score. So if my heart rate at the end of the test was 129 beats per minute, and I did it in 13 minutes and 14 seconds, which is pretty quick, my VO2 is about 49, which is pretty good. I mean, elite athletes can get as high as like 80. I mean, you'll see super high VO2 scores sometimes. But like, that's not bad, right? So that's going to put me in the purple category, which is excellent. So I would be eligible for a zone 3 program. Let's say it took me 15 minutes and at the end of it, my heart rate was 140. Well, now my score is going to be average, right? So that's going to put me in I'm like eligible for zone 2, but like zone 3 is a little too intense, right? That wouldn't be I'm likely to overtrain. I'm likely to plateau. I'm likely to not get the results I want. Let's say my client was, my heart rate was 150 and it took 16 minutes. Right now I'm going to be in the poor category. So zone 1 is going to be a program that I'm eligible for. Does that make sense, guys? Use these calculators. I remember when I first started Sochi, I tried one time to be like, all right. And we all did the math manually. And I was like, and everybody nearly mutinied. And I was like, okay, they're going to run me out of here. I had to do it. But there's an app for that. So those are your 2 main assessments here. So if your client gets a poor score, zone 1, a fair score, zone 2, good or very good, they're going to put them in zone 3. Okay. And lastly, my favorite type of assessments are going to be your posture assessments. We're going to do a pretty brief rundown here because we talk much more about this in other classes. But let's look at what posture looks like, right? This is, your posture is incredibly important, right? It's the base at which you do all your movements from. And so we want to make sure that we have optimal alignment of our entire kinetic chain as often as possible. And the reason for that is because that ensures some of the stuff that we're going to talk about later when we're writing programs, which is neuromuscular efficiency, right? Recruiting the right muscle at the right time for the right amount of force. I don't want to recruit the wrong muscle to do a job, right? If I'm trying to squeeze my biceps, I want my triceps to let go, right? I don't want my triceps pulling in the opposite direction while I'm trying to squeeze because maybe they're overactive. If I'm trying to squat, right? I'm not trying to do, if I'm trying to go down into it, you can't see me. I'm not trying to do this, right? With my knees buckling like that. Right? That's not how I'm designed. I want to use my glutes. So neuromuscular efficiency is recruiting the right muscles in the right planes of motion, the way they're designed to move, because all of the muscles surrounding a joint are working the way they're supposed to. So when we see alterations in posture, we start to see some pretty predictable muscle imbalances, right? So this is pretty darn good posture right here, right? This is optimal alignment. His hips are level, his ear is in line with his shoulder, which is in line with his pelvis, which is in line with his ankle. Excellent posture. When we see alterations in that, right? Like we see shoulder rounding, for instance, right? Or we see a forward head posture. What that is we have overactive and underactive muscles. We've got one muscle on one side of the joint, which is pulling more than it needs to. And we've got a weakened muscle on the opposite side of the joint, not pulling enough. So I told you guys about the low back rounding that I struggle with, right? And that's because my hamstrings are a little overdeveloped. Spend a lot of time doing a lot of running drills, and so what that does is that results in my hamstrings pulling too much and my quadriceps not pulling enough. That's an example of opposite muscles, which we call altered reciprocal inhibition. Remember when we talked about reciprocal inhibition is where one muscle, inhibits the other muscle because it's hey, it's my turn right now, so you shut up. Altered reciprocal inhibition is where that doesn't happen. It's hey, it's my turn right now, and then that muscle's I don't care. Keeps pulling really hard. Right? That's altered. You screwed up your reciprocal inhibition. My hamstrings, when they're supposed to be quiet, they aren't. So when I try to do like knee extension, my hamstring tightens up and it tries to pull it back the other way. So I'm losing quadricep strength, right? Now that's altered reciprocal inhibition, but it also results in another phenomenon called synergistic dominance, where now my hamstrings are keeping other muscles, other muscles have to like come in and take over, right? So when my quadricep doesn't work, maybe my hip flexor will try to do more work instead. Or like when my glute doesn't work, my hamstrings do a little bit of weak hip extension, right? Like your hamstrings assist in driving your leg back, but that's not their primary role. Their primary role is to pull your knee, right? My glute's supposed to be pulling my hip. But if my hamstrings are really eager and they start doing all that hip extension work, now my glute can't do its job. So that's synergistic dominance, where they start dominating instead of, you'll see this sometimes, like one of kind of the easier versions of this to see is actually when people do chin-ups. You'll notice sometimes when somebody's doing like a chin-up, they won't do very good like shoulder extension, and instead they'll end up doing this kind of curve like this and then pulling themselves this way, and that's like the biceps trying to take over. And it's like, yeah, you worked on your vanity muscles a little more than like your prime movers. Classic. Also, it's like weak, like core muscles. Your core muscles are like trying to curl you upwards. There's a lot of, there's a million examples. But so how do we like, observe these things? And by the way, Robert, I know I'm kind of going through these examples really quick. We have classes that teach you, how to read what joint compensations cause what. But for now, we're just kind of going through them really fast. We're not doing the specifics. So like, we know, you are going to know that when your knees cave in, it's your adductors' fault because they are overactive and your glute is underactive. But that's not in this lesson. So we'll get there. But it's weird. I'm sorry I'm addressing you in particular. Normally I get to do this to a group. I usually go, mod oneers, don't freak out. But you're the only mod oneer. So we look at these common postural distortions, right? So now, how do we make sure that if we're trying to spot some postural distortions, if I want to be able to figure out what muscles are doing what, I need to put the right type of stress on your body. And that's where we came up with the overhead squat assessment, right? The overhead squat assessment is an example of a posture assessment. So I should do the overall. So all posture assessments help health and fitness professionals determine the basic structural and functional status of an individual based on 5 key checkpoints. That's going to be your foot and ankle complex, your knees, the lumbopelvic hip complex, your shoulders, and your head. So for instance, at the feet, I'm looking to see if your feet are turning in or out, and if they are flattening or if they're excessively inverting. Then I'm going to look at your knees and see, do they cave in or do they cave out? I'm going to look at the lumbopelvic hip complex and see if it tilts forward or if it tilts back, or if you tend to lean too much. Or actually, we don't talk about it very often, but if you maybe have an inadequate lean, sometimes you'll see that actually. This is not even in NASM. NASM doesn't cover this, which is kind of silly, but it's inadequate lean's really similar to low back rounding, so they kind of get the same thing. But when you see somebody squat like this, where they just like don't lean at all, it's just like knee forward thing. Basically, it's almost the same as like a low back rounding situation. But that's an inadequate lean, which we don't talk about very often. Then we have, we look at the shoulder. Oh, we also look at the lumbopelvic. We see asymmetric shifts. Like, do you sit into one hip? I've been having trouble with that lately. Your shoulders, do you have shoulder rounding or shoulder elevation? And then do you have a forward head posture, right? So we're going to look at all of those things as we go through different assessments. So luckily, there is one assessment in particular, the overhead squat assessment, that is great at assessing all of that almost at once. So it's designed to assess your dynamic flexibility, meaning your flexibility under movement, on both sides of the body, as well as like underactive muscles, right? So it's also measuring your strength. Sometimes it's overactive muscles that are tight, that are pulling us in one direction, but a lot of times it's also weak muscles that are letting that pull happen. One of the reasons people have such a hard time holding their arms up overhead is because they have weak shoulder muscles. and weak upper back muscles in between their shoulder blades that support and hold their arms up, right? If you have a weak lower trapezius, right, which is all the way down here, that makes it harder for you to raise your arm up overhead. Meanwhile, if you've got a tight lat, which is in charge of pulling this way, right? So you've got one muscle pulling you down and you got another muscle that's not pulling you up. And so then you end up raising your arms and you end up like this instead of this. So when you're doing the overhead squat, it's great because it puts stress on all the joints we're looking at. And so you're going to instruct your client to raise their arms up overhead, and you're going to look, this is a perfect overhead squat. This is exactly what we're looking for. Ideally, what we're looking for is alignment here from the wrists down to the shoulders, which stay in line with the body. She doesn't have an excessive arch here. She has a natural lumbar curve. So her pelvis isn't rotating this way, and it's also not rounding by rotating this way. And then this is all in line with this joint right here, right? This is creating a perfect like parallel line. That's an ideal squat. Now, let's say she looks like this, where she's leaning too far forward, right? That is an excessive forward lean. Or let's say she's like this, she has an inadequate lean, right? That's low back arching. And then, or let's say like all that looks good, but then her shoulders aren't, right? So now I know like in this scenario, she's got tight lats. In this scenario, she's got tight hip flexors and tight low back. And in this scenario, she's either got tight hip flexors and abdominals or tight calves. And we got to figure out like which one's which is where we go into our modifications, which we're also not going into tonight, but we'll teach in later classes. So here, right, this is ideal alignment. Dogs, you know, the hip in the knee and actually in line, not with your big toe, by the way, which is a big mistake a lot of people make. Your second and third toe, right between the two. Center of your foot, not big toe. Big toe is technically this, but, you know, not as exaggerated. So that's knees caving in. I know that this is tight adductors and tight biceps, this little tiny hamstring muscle, biceps femoris, and tight TFL, so hip, adductor, and knee. And probably some feet stuff going on as well. Although the model for this, I love this picture actually. I don't know how this lady must be in like so mobile because she's always the example we use. I can't do this without also moving my feet. I don't know how she does it. And I have super mobile ankles. Like ankles are not my problem when it comes to mobility. And I don't know how she does this. She totally keeps it in alignment. And then we see feet turn out and she like super, and then like goes in totally the opposite direction here and just way overdoes it. But yeah, so those are what we're looking for in the overhead squat. And that's going to be one of our best assessments that we have at our disposal for measuring posture. You've probably seen this, if this is your first time looking at the overhead squat, you've probably seen versions of this where people use PVC pipe overhead. It's cool, I have nothing against that. There's a modified version. I think that adds a little bit of stability on the shoulder though. So I actually personally, although it does put more stress on the back. So it's got its benefits, it's got its drawbacks. Other posture assessment that we're primarily going to look at in our weight loss clients are going to be the single leg squat assessment. Now this is just like the overhead squat, except you're only going to pay attention to the knee and ankle complex. In fact, really just the knee. And this is designed to assess your ankle proprioception, so your ankle balance, your core strength, so more balance, and hip joint stability, so how well you are able to recruit the muscles around your hip joint to control what is essentially looking, you know, at your knee. So what you're looking for is, does it stay in alignment or does it excessively cave in? If it excessively caves in, it actually means the same thing as this version of the knees cave in. It means underactive glute muscles, underactive stabilizers in the core and ankle complex, and overactive biceps femoris, TFL, and adductor complex. When you guys get to capstone, by the way, you actually do get to, I know it's only like one thing to look at in a single leg squat, so sometimes it's like, why do we even do it? But when you get to capstone, you'll actually look at all kinds of other ones too. She's also got a little bit of a hip hike over here. which is kind of fun. You'll get to see that later on. There are other movement assessments. We have the pushing assessment and the pulling assessment, which we look to see if your client like elevates or reaches with their head. But they are not typically used with obese clientele, simply because like that can cause like breathing restrictions. And so like that shortness of breath isn't very common, which I always think is kind of funny because it's like, what are we just gonna not, I mean, we're gonna do pushing exercises eventually anyways. So I do it with my obese clientele, but it's not in this book. So you're not gonna get quite as many questions related to pushing, pulling assessments, this mod. But you'll, all three of the other mods, we cover those pretty in depth. So fitness assessments, they enable us to decide the right flexibility, cardio, core, balance, power, and strength training, which is all the stuff we're going to learn in the rest of the program design class. How to write a good flexibility program, a good cardio program, movement prep, and total body strength. And that is it. 52 slides down in no time, even with silly Emil Zatopek stories in between. Do you guys have any questions tonight?
No.
No.
No, not tonight.
Yeah, a lot of you guys, this is definitely a review. I know we do a lot of assessment review. It's just such a big part of what we do, that like, and it's also like the questions are hard. Like assessment questions tend to feel harder just because it's like, they cause you to do like some abstract thinking. Where it's like, which of the following muscles is likely overactive? And you're like, which side of the list am I on? So we like to review these a lot. But Robert, how you feeling? This is your first time seeing this stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I know everybody's like, oh yeah, this is all easy. This is a lot of assessments for me to remember, but if you're saying that we're gonna review them oftenly, then yeah, I'm all good.
And in Capstone, you get a lot, like when I tell you guys like how Capstone is like a lot of test prep, that's really where Mo is going to drill the crap out of you on like knees cave in, overactive. All right, knees cave in, underactive, and they're going to make you, he's going to point around the room and stuff. And we do that too, but we do that in primarily 2 classes. We look at that in our kinesiology class, and in our we have a whole 12 days dedicated to assessments actually.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
all right, guys. Well, that's about it.
Thanks so much. Have a
Thank
good
you,
night.
Brad.
Good to see all y'all.
Thank you,
Bye.
Brad.
Hopefully this waiting room isn't being a jerk tomorrow. All right. See you guys.
Bye.
See ya.
See you.